It is a terrible tragedy that so many millions of people around the world are unable to exercise their basic right to education. However, in most cases, it is not a matter of will, but of resources. In the developing world especially, many governments simply do not have the infrastructure to provide an adequate education to their youth. But it is an entirely different matter when a government willfully seeks to deprive its people, or a group of its people, from receiving this basic human right to knowledge. Sadly, this is the case in present-day Iran.
In this segment of Western Window, we'll be hearing from members of Western's own Baha'i community as they share stories of persecution toward themselves, their family, and friends around the world. Many of these students are Iranian refugees forced to flee their own country in search of safety, equality, and higher education. Today they fight to spread awareness of the present state of inequality still persisting in Iran.
The Baha'is in Iran have been persecuted for 150 years in sort of recurrent waves, but after 1979, with the revolution that took place there, the persecution, there was a renewed wave of very violent persecution. Many executions, disappearances, arrests, imprisonment, confiscated property, people losing their jobs, and children being ostracized in school, and many other forms of persecution that have occurred really in the last 3 decades.
So the persecutions have been going on for a long time. First the Babis, and then the Baha'u'llah himself, the Bab himself was shot. And then, of course, the imprisonment and the exile of Baha'u'llah and his family. And the believers, and the early believers, and one of them would have been my great-grandfather, was among the exiles, who was exiled from his home with his family. And so it's been going on for quite some time.
And as we are speaking, there's a lot of people who are in prison, like the seven leaders are officials of Baha'is in Iran, even though they were just working as volunteers and they had no real power, but they were like working for the community to take care of the needs of the Baha'i community. They just, out of nowhere, they took them, they put them in prison. It's been 3 years and there were no solution for it. They're still in the prison. There's no choice for you. You either have to stay, start a family, or just struggle with your family, or you come out, which is not better than staying, but still it's a choice that you have.
I cannot say that it's safe because it's not. But anyway, yeah, there is a lot of Baha'is that they are living there, but many of Baha'is are living around the world, and they actually, I can say most of them, they just left because they wanted to have education, have higher education, and they wanted to, reach their goal.
The United Nations actually discovered a document by the Iranian regime which specifically stated their intention to block the progress of the Baha'i community. And one of the ways they do this is denying education, like strictly denying university education, but also making it very difficult for younger children and younger Baha'i youth to attend, and with the respect of their teachers and their peers and so forth.
I have two cousins that are 1 year older than me, so they weren't allowed to graduate high school. When they took their culminating exams, they also had to take exams to get into university. It's kind of different than the U.S. Their scores were dropped just because they were Baha'is. But that doesn't mean that the government won't take them into the military with drafts and things like that. So they have to serve those civil purposes, but they can't graduate school.
It started since I entered the elementary school. Even in our history classes in middle school, there were some sections in history book about Baha'i faith, but it was all incorrect, and they were saying a lot of bad things about Baha'i faith. And because I was going to school, I had to read it. So psychologically, it was a lot of pressure reading about my religion and reading information that is not true.
So denial of education is a very effective way to try and block the progress of a community and to ostracize it and to limit its opportunities. Yeah, similar things happened before the Holocaust, before the Armenian genocide. So this is also another one of the many indicators of sort of pre-genocidal movements within a population is denial of education.
When I finished my high school, I applied to go to university. They usually have an entrance exam that you have to apply for it and take the exam, which I did after I finished my 12th grade. And I applied, but on the application they have a box for choosing your religion, and they have all the minorities, starting with Islam, which is majority, and then Christianity, Zoroastrian, but there was no box for Baha'i, but there is something that says other, and you have to fill out what is the religion. So obviously I said Baha'i, and I circled other, and then I waited a month. When everybody got their result, I didn't get any result. I went to the board and asked what is happening. Did I pass? Did I didn't pass? And they said no, unless you convert to Islam, you can go to the university, but other than that, there's no choice. And I said no, I wouldn't convert to Islam because this is what I believe and I love, but I respect Islam. But they said no, so that was the main reason that my parents chose to flee from Iran.
And so what the families and the Baha'is started doing is they started gathering in individual homes. And their parents would be, if there was a teacher who taught English, they would be the English professor, and their science and chemistry and physics. So they started these little groups in their homes. And and of course it grew, and it was very informal, but many universities in the United States and Europe, by the way, this is all over the world, have acknowledged and recognized their education. So it started this way. And relatively recently, in the last within the last couple of years, the government went into the homes of where those students were being taught. And they confiscated their computers, and they broke them and their books, and they put in prison some of their teachers. And so this is what is happening. This is what we want to attract attention to, what is happening. And the Baha'i Institute of Higher Education, BIHE, was developed to help those students to finish their education, come to the United States or Europe or any other country in Europe or elsewhere to finish their education.
You know, the simple reason is that the Baha'is have a belief system which is not identical to the beliefs of the ruling elite in Iran. And their goal is to force the Baha'i community to conform to their religious belief system.
They feel that Muhammad was the last prophet, so they always have this extra persecution against Baha'is. They feel that they will lose their powers if they let the people have the interaction with the Baha'is.
So in their opinion then, the Baha'is are apostates, that they are denying Muhammad, which is of course not the case. Because as you may have heard from discussing these things with other Baha'is, that Baha'is believe in all the prophets that have come, because there's only one God, and he sends his prophets to mankind on a regular basis. And Baha'u'llah is simply the latest of a whole line of prophets that go back to Buddha and Abraham and Christ and Muhammad. And there will also be some more coming in the future.
The fundamental belief of the Baha'i community is that this age we live in is characterized by increasing global interdependence. There are more of us on this planet, and we need to learn essentially how to get along with 7 billion people now on this planet. and all the sources of strife and conflict and division historically, religious differences, nationalism, racial prejudice, gender discrimination, all of these sources of conflict, really in this day and age, we need to mature beyond those. It's in many ways a question of basic maturity. So the oneness of humanity is a fundamental teaching of the Baha'i faith, that we need to recognize our organic unity and interdependence and actually build a new social order that's based on that recognition. That's the primary teaching of the faith, and that's one of the reasons we're actually, well, that's the reason we're persecuted in Iran, because the government and the ruling clergy in that country do not accept that fundamental concept.
Well, I'm hoping, of course, for things to change and for my family to be able to pursue an education and just live within their faith, have religious freedom. But I try not to take the view of being against the government of Iran or taking steps to bring them down, really. It's more to inform people that, I guess like this interview, that it is going on, so that if a genocide situation is planned, it can't just take place without people knowing about it.
Since this is the largest minority in Iran, we are hoping that other countries could provide some support, so it's not those people who are in Iran and going through these persecutions are not alone. They know that there are people outside voicing out for them. So
the human rights situation in Iran is really only going to improve when there's a change in the attitude of the government, a movement towards respecting the fundamental rights of all its citizens. This international campaign to shine a spotlight on the situation in Iran is done in part to encourage the Iranian government to move in that direction. Ultimately, whether it's this government that changes its mind or whether the Iranian people need to bring in a new government, that's, I think, yet to be determined. But there are the vast majority of Iranian people want the human rights of all Iranians recognized. So in that sense, the government does not represent the Iranian citizens. And there is pressure building in that country. I think it's a question of when that pressure will bring about significant change, either in the current government or with the removal of that government and a new government emerging.
This world needs is a spiritual renewal. It is not going to happen by force, definitely not going to happen by force. But we need some kind of a spiritual resurgence. That's what the Baha'is are talking about. And that we are one in this, and we should be brothers and sisters and take care of each other, not fight against each other, because that's not going to get us anywhere. But if we work together, then we will be working towards the happiness and the peace of all mankind, not just us against you, but everybody. The whole world will be working together.